I'm Ashley, and if you're here, you've probably already seen the video. The one that made me famous for 10 minutes and almost sent me to a psychiatric ward for the rest of my life. But before I became the girl from the Midnight Challenge, I was just Ashley from Oakhaven, Massachusetts, and that alone was already a punishment. Oakhaven isn't a place. It's a grave. It's a town that smells like mold, burned firewood, and Puritan guilt that's about 300 years old but still thick in the air. Here, history isn't something you learn in school. It's something that suffocates you at breakfast. Every street, every stone, every crooked tree has a plaque talking about some trial, some bonfire, or worse, some poor soul who was hanged. I was 17 and had one dream, getting out of here. And in today's world, the ticket to freedom isn't a college degree, it's a viral video. I spent most of my free time lying on my bed, watching the world happen on my phone screen. I saw people doing insane things, ridiculous dances, and of course, horror challenges. And I kept thinking, why not me? I live in the most haunted place in America. I've got the raw material. My TikTok profile was average. About 2,000 followers, mostly kids from school who followed me out of pity or just to see if I'd embarrass myself. I posted makeup videos, failed recipe attempts, the basics. But I needed a boom. I needed something that would make the algorithm stop ignoring me and launch me into the stratosphere. That's when I found the Midnight Challenge. It wasn't new. People had been doing it for months, always using generic urban legends. But then I had a brilliant idea. What if I did it with our witch? The Witch of Oakhaven. The infamous Abigail. The legend of Abigail was the backbone of our town. They say she was a healer, a woman who knew too much about herbs and nature. And that, of course, in the 1690s, was a one-way ticket to the gallows. She was hanged from the crooked oak on the edge of town, and her body was never found. The story says that before she died, she cursed the town, promising to return whenever a vain heart summoned her for trivial reasons. I thought it was perfect. Vanity, triviality, TikTok. I spent weeks researching details. I didn't want to make a dumb video. I wanted authenticity. I wanted it to feel real. I went to the town library, which also smelled like mold and sadness, and asked to see old records. The librarian, Mrs. Perkins, gave me the look of someone who had seen 1,000 teenagers trying to uncover stupid mysteries. "Looking for Abigail, dear?" she asked, her voice dry as old paper. "Yes, Mrs. Perkins. For a history project." I lied shamelessly, my heart pounding in my throat. She brought me a dusty box. Inside were copies of trial documents, handwritten in brown ink. The archaic English was hard to read, but I caught the main points: accusations of witchcraft, consorting with the devil, killing livestock. And most importantly for my video, a description of the ritual she supposedly used. The viral Midnight Challenge required a mirror, 3 black candles, and a chant. Abigail's legend called for almost the same thing, except it involved a circle of salt and a more specific invocation. I decided to merge the two. I'd perform the ritual as authentically as possible, but with TikTok aesthetics. I just needed a location and someone to film. The place had to be creepy but accessible. The cemetery was too obvious, and the police patrolled it. The woods were too dark, and I was terrified of possums. The final choice was the Miller House. The Miller House was an abandoned Victorian mansion at the end of Elm Street. It had been empty for about 50 years. The roof was collapsing, the windows were broken, and people said that inside there were still pieces of furniture covered with white sheets, waiting for owners who would never return. It was perfect. No one went there, and it was close enough to my house that I could run home if things went wrong. The reluctant cameraman was Kevin. Kevin was my neighbor, a weird kid who owned a decent camera and was easily bribed with the promise of being tagged in the video and maybe a bag of Doritos. "Ashley, are you sure about this?" Kevin asked on the night of the shoot as we packed the backpack with our gear. It was a cold autumn night, the kind that makes you feel winter knocking at the door. "Of course I'm sure, Kevin. It's going to be amazing. Think about the views. Millions. We'll be the first duo from Oakhaven to actually go viral," I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice while feeling an icy knot in my stomach. Kevin adjusted the backpack strap. He was wearing a huge jacket and looked like he wanted to bolt at any second. "But what if it's real? What if this Abigail shows up?" I laughed, a nervous sound. Kevin, stop. It's a 300-year-old legend. It's all psychological. We just need lighting, shadows, and maybe a good sound effect in editing. We reached the Miller house around 11:40 p.m. We had to crawl under a hole in the chain-link fence. The house loomed against the black sky, like a giant skeleton. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of our shoes crunching on gravel. The front door was locked, but as expected, the back door leading into the old kitchen was open. The smell inside was awful, mold, dust, and something like wet earth and rot. We went in slowly. I turned on my phone's flashlight, illuminating the living room. The place was exactly as I'd imagined. Furniture covered with sheets, a grand piano that looked like it had been abandoned in the middle of a song, and a staircase leading up into darkness. "We'll do it here," I whispered, pointing to the center of the room. The wooden floor creaked loudly under my feet. Kevin pulled the camera and tripod out of the backpack. He set everything up, turning on the LED light. The cold, white light contrasted bizarrely with the darkness and the historic grime of the place. I started preparing the ritual. First, the protective circle, just like the records about Abigail described. I took the container of coarse salt and poured it onto the floor, forming a perfect circle, large enough for me to stand inside. "You're sure you're staying outside the circle?" I asked Kevin. "Yes. I need to film your reaction, right?" He was pale, but professional. Next, the candles. I placed the 3 black candles in a triangle inside the circle. Real black candles, bought at Mrs. Thompson's esoteric shop. She had looked at me with disapproval when I said they were for decoration. I picked up the hand mirror I'd brought with me. It was old, with a rusty metal frame, something I'd taken from my grandmother's attic. The mirror was crucial. It was the doorway. When the clock on my phone hit 12:05 a.m., I took my position. I started recording on my phone for the vertical shot, and Kevin turned on the main camera for the horizontal angle. I took a deep breath. It was time. "Hey guys," I began, speaking loudly, my voice echoing strangely through the empty room. "Welcome to the Midnight Challenge. I'm Ashley, and tonight I'm not just anywhere. I'm in Oakhaven, the town of witches. And tonight we're going to summon the most famous one of all, Abigail." I paused dramatically, staring into the camera with wide eyes, trying to look scared but confident. The challenge is simple. Perform the invocation and look into the mirror. If she's here, the mirror will show us. They say she only appears if the person calling her is vain. Well, I want 10 million views, so yeah, I'm vain. Let's do this. I lowered the phone and placed it on the floor, pointing toward me. I picked up the mirror. The candlelight flickered, and shadows danced along the walls. It felt like the air had grown heavier. I began reciting the chant from TikTok, adapted with her name. "Abigail, Abigail, spirit of the night, come dance with me beneath the cold moon. Abigail, Abigail, show me your power, show me your dark face." I repeated it 3 times. Kevin's breathing was the only sound besides my voice, fast and shallow. Nothing happened. A wave of frustration hit me. I'd set everything up perfectly. The setting, the candles, the right time. Was it just a stupid legend? My heart sank. The video was going to flop. "Again," I whispered to Kevin, who nodded, trembling. I closed my eyes and tried to feel something. Anything. Cold, the smell of sulfur, any cliché horror movie sign. Nothing. I opened my eyes and looked into the mirror. My reflection was there, pale and frightened. "Abigail, I call you with my desire," I said, raising my voice, forcing emotion. "I want the fame that will get me out of here. If you're here, give me a sign." At that exact moment, the wind outside, completely still until then, let out a sharp howl. It wasn't normal wind. It sounded like a scream. The flames of the 3 black candles stretched sideways, nearly going out. Kevin made a choking sound. "Ashley, what was that?" he whispered. "Keep filming," I ordered, pure adrenaline flooding my veins. This wasn't editing. This was real. I looked back into the mirror. My reflection was distorted. It wasn't just fear on my face anymore. There was a dark shape right behind me, a shadow that wasn't in the room. I spun around, breaking the salt circle, but there was nothing there. Just the darkness of the Miller house. "Kevin, did you see that?" "I saw the candlelight. And I think the mirror went black for a second," he said, his voice thin. I was about to say the video might already be good enough when I heard a different sound. It wasn't the wind. It was a dry crack, like old wood splitting. The sound came from the wall behind me, in the corner of the room, near the fireplace. I moved closer, phone flashlight in hand. I ignored the warning screaming in my head to run. Fear of failure was stronger than fear of a ghost. The wall, covered in faded wallpaper, was cracked. I touched it. It was damp and cold. With a hard pull, I tore away a section of wallpaper. Beneath it wasn't plaster or brick. There was a small cavity, a hidden built-in cupboard. Inside, at the back, there was a box. A small, dark wooden box, about the size of a thick book, wrapped in fabric that looked like linen but was rotten with age. "Ashley, don't touch that," Kevin begged, but I already had the box in my hands. I set it on the floor, inside the broken salt circle, and pulled away the fabric. The smell of earth and old spices rose into the air. The box wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside were two things: a small glass vial filled with gray powder, I didn't even want to know what it was, and a rolled-up parchment. The parchment looked centuries old. I carefully unrolled it, feeling the fragile paper almost crumble in my hands. The writing was cursive, done with a quill, faded but readable. It was a diary, or a record. I read the first line out loud, my hands shaking. "I, Abigail, write these words on the eve of my departure. It's hers, Ashley. It's the witch's diary." Kevin was almost shouting. I scanned the text quickly, searching for something that would give me the key to the story, something I could use in the video. Most of it spoke of injustice, of faith, and a betrayal by neighbors. But then, at the bottom of the page, there was a signature. It wasn't just Ilara. I had to blink several times to make sure the light wasn't playing tricks on me. The signature, written in firm, confident handwriting, read, "Ilara Holloway." I felt the floor vanish beneath my feet. The air left my lungs. I bent forward, hands on my knees, struggling to breathe. "What? What is it, Ashley? Did you find some kind of potion recipe?" Kevin asked, confused. I lifted my head, staring at the parchment, and then at the camera, which was still recording. "Holloway," I whispered. "Kevin, you know what my last name is, right? It's Holloway, obviously. Ashley Holloway. What does that have to do with anything?" I looked at the parchment again, then at myself. I had always lived in Oakhaven. My family had always lived in Oakhaven. My grandmother lived 3 blocks away. Ilara Holloway. Ashley Holloway. The witch I had just tried to summon for TikTok fame had the same family name as me. The name on my birth certificate, the name on my social media profiles, was the same name as the hanged witch who had cursed the town. "This can't be a coincidence," I said, but my voice was already breaking with panic. I felt a cold that didn't come from the night air. It came from inside me, crawling up my spine, like something had recognized me. I grabbed the parchment and the vial. "We have to get out of here. Now." Kevin didn't hesitate. He grabbed the tripod and the camera, and we ran out of the Miller house as if the devil himself were chasing us. I didn't stop running until I reached my house, locked the door, and collapsed onto the living room rug, gasping for air. Kevin, pale and shaking, stood in front of me, still holding the camera. "What the hell was that? Ashley? Are you related to her? This is insane." I got up, stumbling into the kitchen to drink water, the wooden box still clutched tightly against my chest. I couldn't think straight. My mind was trapped in a 300-year loop. Me, Holloway. Ilara Holloway. I ran upstairs, ignoring my parents asleep downstairs. I needed to confirm it. I needed proof. I went straight to the basement. My basement was where all the things the Holloway family didn't want to see, but couldn't bring themselves to throw away, were stored. It smelled of mothballs and memory. I rummaged through old trunks, looking for photographs, family trees my grandmother loved to make. Finally, I found what I was looking for: a large, heavy leather-bound book, the lineage book. I opened it under the weak basement light. The pages were yellowed and thin. I began tracing backward, father to father, mother to mother, moving deeper into the past. Generation 10. My grandmother, Patricia Holloway, Generation 15. A cousin who moved to California, Generation 20. A farmer who fought in the Civil War. I kept going, further and further back, until I reached the oldest pages, written in handwriting that looked exactly like the parchment I was holding. And there it was. Generation 28. Ilara Holloway. Born 1670. Died 1692. Accused of witchcraft in Oakhaven. And next to the name, a small note, added by some ashamed relative centuries later, the hanged one. My blood ran cold. I wasn't summoning a random witch from a legend. I was summoning a ghost from my own family. I was a direct descendant of Ilara Holloway. I let the book fall to the floor. The parchment slipped from my hand and landed beside it. I stared at the wooden box. What else was in there? I picked up the small glass vial. The gray powder inside shifted as I turned it. It didn't really look gray. It looked like soil mixed with something that faintly shimmered. Curiosity, the same vanity that had taken me to the Miller house, pushed me to open it. I uncorked the vial. The smell that rose wasn't mold or dirt. It smelled like pine and smoke, with a metallic note underneath, like dried blood. I barely had time to react. The moment the smell hit my nose, my phone in my pocket began vibrating violently. I grabbed it, thinking Kevin was calling me. But it wasn't a call. It was TikTok. My video. The video I had started recording in the Miller house. It had been uploaded automatically. I hadn't pressed the upload button. But what made me scream and throw the phone away wasn't the fact that the video had posted itself. It was the view count. In less than 10 minutes, the video already had 400,000 views. And it was still climbing. And on the screen, in bold letters, was the title that someone, or something, had added to my video. The Midnight Challenge. A Holloway calls a Holloway. I crawled away from the open vial and the phone, feeling a cold presence fill the basement. I got what I wanted. I went viral. But the price was far higher than I could ever have imagined. I didn't just summon the witch. I freed her. And she knew exactly who I was. The game had just begun, and I wasn't the storyteller anymore. I was the main character in a real horror story. And I had to fix this mess before Oakhaven discovered that Ilara Holloway had returned, and that she was wearing my face. I ran out of that barn as if the ground were on fire, and the devil himself were giving me a farewell hug. I was shaking so badly that when I reached the pickup truck, my hands could barely get the key into the ignition. The fear was no longer that thrilling rush of adrenaline. It was a frozen terror that settled heavy in my stomach. I drove home on autopilot. Oakhaven was asleep, quiet and innocent, unaware that its worst Puritan nightmare had just been dug up by a girl addicted to views. When I got home, the first thing I did, in the middle of my panic, was the most useless gesture of all. I deleted the video. I went on TikTok and erased the draft, the original, every copy I had saved. I knew that if the spirit of Ilara Holloway had noticed me, the universe had already logged everything, but it was the only thing I could control at that moment. It was like trying to put out a wildfire with a glass of water. I went to the bathroom and washed my face at least 10 times, trying to scrub away the imaginary soot and the smell of mold from that barn. And then came the mirror. I wasn't the same Ashley anymore. It wasn't just exhaustion or dark circles. There was something in my eyes, a hardness, a shadow that felt centuries old. I leaned closer, took a deep breath, and for a moment I saw it. It wasn't a clear image of someone else, but an overlap, as if my soul were being used as a projection screen. Ilara's anger was there, creasing my brow, tightening my lips. She had used me as a doorway, and now she was stuck to me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, trying to close my eyes, but every time I breathed in, I smelled damp earth and sulfur. The name. Ilara Holloway. The same name. I had to know. I had to understand whether this was just a grotesque coincidence, or if I had summoned my own witch ancestor. As soon as the sun came up, I jumped out of bed, threw on the first clothes I saw, and went to the only place that keeps Oakhaven's ugly secrets, the town library. Mrs. Gable, the librarian, was there, shelving books. She looked at me with the expression of someone who knows teenagers only walk in when they're in academic or spiritual trouble. "Good morning, Ashley. Last-minute research?" she asked, her voice soft and calm. "Yes, Mrs. Gable. Local history. The trials." My voice came out strange rough. I went straight to the dustiest section, the one no one touches except retired local historians. I pulled the thickest volumes, smelling of old paper and sadness, and started flipping through them, searching for Holloway. It took a while. The print was small, the pages yellowed. But I found it. Register of the Accused of Witchcraft, Oakhaven, 1692. Elara Holloway. My heart started pounding, so hard it felt like it might tear out of my chest. Her record was detailed. She was accused of being a shadow healer, of using forbidden herbs, and of communing with the evil one in the family barn, the very same barn where I had pulled that stupid stunt. I was reading my own story, just delayed by 300 years. The worst part wasn't the description of the crimes, but the note about her bloodline. It said the Holloway family had been viewed with suspicion since their arrival for being too isolated and for having strange birthmarks. I had one, tiny on the back of my neck, which my mother always said was a sign of good luck. Then I turned the page and found what made me feel like throwing up right there. A crude charcoal sketch, poorly done but unmistakable. The face of Elara Holloway. It wasn't identical. Her hair was pulled into a Puritan bun, and her mouth was thinner, but the bone structure, the shape of the nose, the way the eyebrow arched. It was my face. It was blood speaking. I was her echo. I shut the book with a sharp thud that made Mrs. Gable glance at me over her glasses. The Holloway family hadn't disappeared from Oakhaven. It had stayed, blended in, hidden, waiting for the right moment, for some foolish descendant obsessed with likes to open the door. I went home with the book hidden in my backpack, feeling the weight of history and the smell of death clinging to my skin. Things started getting worse very fast. First, it was my phone. I had deleted the video, but it kept reappearing in my drafts, not as the original clip, but as pure static with my distorted voice repeating the ritual line. I call you by name, by blood. I deleted it again and again, and it kept coming back. It was as if Elara were using my own phone to haunt me digitally. Then came the sounds. I was alone at home and started hearing whispers. They weren't clear words, just a constant hiss, like someone speaking right next to my ear. I'd turn around and there'd be nothing. I'd look in the mirror, and the shadow in my eyes would be darker. The peak of that haunting phase was when I walked into the kitchen and found all my spices spread across the counter. It wasn't a mess. They were arranged in small piles, forming a symbol that looked like an ancient rune, something I'd seen in witchcraft books. And the worst part, the salt, which is supposed to be protective, was in the center, mixed with pepper and dirt. It was a direct insult. I was being attacked by my own ancestor, and she was using spices. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I needed an accomplice, someone who would help me think, even if they thought I was crazy. I called Liam. Liam has been my best friend since kindergarten. He's skeptical but loyal. He's the kind of person who will try to explain a ghost with quantum physics, but if needed, he'll still hold the flashlight while you try to exorcise it. I met him at the town diner, Grandma's Cafe, which served the worst coffee but offered the best privacy. Liam, I messed up. Badly. I started, without preamble, drinking my strawberry milkshake like it was fuel for facing hell. I told him everything. The challenge, the obsession with going viral, the barn, the name, the feeling that she had answered me, her face in the mirror. Liam watched me, brow furrowed. He's very expressive. Ashley, you were tired. You scared yourself. You know every old town has a witch legend. And Holloway is a common last name around here. It's a creepy coincidence. No, Liam. It's not. I pulled the book from my backpack, opened it to the sketch, and pushed it toward him. Look! He took the book, hesitant. Looked at Elara's charcoal drawing. Looked at me. Looked at the drawing again. He stopped chewing his sandwich mid-bite. Oh, hell, he whispered. That's terrifying. The mouth is exactly like yours. Exactly. And she doesn't just look like me, Liam. She's here. She's in my house, in my phone, in my head. I told him about the spices, the whispers, the static on my phone. Liam had gone pale. The skepticism was gone, replaced by very real fear. What does she want? He asked. Revenge. That's what vengeful witches want, right? She was hanged, or burned, I don't know. The book says she was buried in unconsecrated ground outside the cemetery, so her soul would never rest. And I, with my stupidity and my hunger for fame, gave her a return ticket. We spent the next hour trying to come up with a logical solution. Burn the book, perform another ritual to send her away. Liam suggested calling a priest, but Oakhaven is such a secular town that the local priest probably only knows about taxes and church fairs. The conversation went nowhere, but the relief of sharing the burden was enormous. Liam promised he would research banishment rituals, while I tried to act normal. But normalcy was slipping away from me, like water down a drain. The subtle possession I had noticed in the mirror began to show itself in my behavior. I was becoming cruel. I was standing in line at the grocery store when a woman tried to cut in front of me. Before, I would have rolled my eyes and let it go. That day, something inside me boiled. I stared at her with an intensity that made her step back, and I felt a genuine urge to scream at her, to humiliate her in public. When I left the store, I realized I was talking to myself, whispering, "Injustice is always paid back with interest." That wasn't Ashley. That was Alara speaking through me. My voice was changing. I started using archaic words that had never been part of my teenage vocabulary. I corrected people cruelly, and my patience had vanished. I looked at the people of Oakhaven, the gossiping neighbors, the kids at school, the customers at the diner, and I felt Alara's contempt for them. Liam noticed it the next morning. "Ash, you're different. You're walking differently. You look rigid. And you called me foolish youth yesterday." "Who even says foolish youth? It's just a way of speaking, Liam." "You're being melodramatic," I replied, my voice cold and motionless. I was pulling away from him, feeling that his friendship was a burden. Alara was isolating me. I needed specialized help, someone who understood ghosts, bloodline curses, and most importantly, how to close a dimensional doorway I had opened because of a 10-second video. I started researching online, avoiding the obvious DIY exorcism results. I needed something specific to Oakhaven, to Puritan history, to witches. That's when I found an obscure forum filled with people discussing Massachusetts folklore, and one name kept appearing, Professor Alastair Finch. He wasn't a priest or a reality show ghost hunter. He was a retired professor of religious studies from Boston University, specializing in Puritan demonology and banishment rituals. He had written a book about the Salem trials and, more importantly, had an entire section dedicated to the lesser cases of Oakhaven. I found his address in a neighboring town, about a 2-hour drive away. I knew it was insane, me, a small-town girl, knocking on an academic's door to say, "Hi, I summoned a witch from my own family for social media clout, and now she wants to take over my body." But I had no choice. With every passing hour, I felt Alara growing stronger. I was losing control of my own body. I decided to go that night. I couldn't wait. I told my mom I was staying at Liam's to study. She didn't question it. She was used to my disappearing acts. While I packed a small backpack, I felt a chill at the back of my neck. I turned just in time to see an object fly off my desk. It was a small locket my grandmother had given me, engraved with the Holloway family crest. It shattered against the wall. The sound wasn't glass breaking. It was dry, cruel laughter. Alara didn't want me to leave. She didn't want me to seek help. I grabbed the truck keys and ran outside without looking back. I was driving down the dark road, the radio the only thing on, playing some generic pop song that gave me a sliver of comfort. Suddenly, the radio crackled. The music vanished, and a deep, ancient voice filled the cab. "You cannot run from who you are, girl. You are mine. My blood. My vengeance." I screamed and slammed the power button, but the voice continued, coming from inside the truck. It was Alara. I was crying, speeding up, forcing myself to focus on the road. "I am not you," I shouted at the empty cab. "Oh, you are," the voice replied, as if she were sitting in the passenger seat. "They betrayed me. They betrayed us. Oakhaven must burn." I felt the steering wheel heat up under my hands. The truck began to sway dangerously, as if pushed by an invisible force. I had to fight the wheel to keep it on the road. If Alara could influence me physically, I was running out of time. I reached the neighboring town, more modern, more academic. Professor Finch's address led me to an old red brick house with a porch covered in wisteria. It didn't look like the lair of an exorcism expert. It looked like a grandfather's home. It was almost 11 at night. I parked and hesitated. I was about to shatter an old man's peace, just to tell him the most unbelievable story in the world. I got out of the truck, fear churning my stomach, and rang the doorbell. It took a moment. The living room light came on, and the door opened. Professor Alastair Finch was tall and thin, wearing glasses low on his nose and plaid flannel pajamas. He looked at me first with irritation at being woken, then with curiosity. Yes, what is a young woman doing here at this hour? I couldn't stop myself. I was so desperate, so overwhelmed by Alara's presence, that the words tumbled out. Professor Finch, my name is Ashley Holloway. I'm from Oakhaven. I did a stupid TikTok challenge and summoned a Puritan which named Alara Holloway, who happens to be my ancestor, and she's possessing me. Please, you have to help me send her back. Professor Finch didn't laugh. He didn't shut the door. He simply looked me up and down, and the seriousness in his expression gave me a thread of hope. Holloway, you say? He opened the door wider. I've been expecting someone with that name for a very long time. Come in, child. We have much to discuss about the Oakhaven trials, and about your blood. I stepped into his house, feeling that I had finally found someone who believed my madness. At the same time, Ilara's presence inside me intensified. She was furious. I turned to close the door, and in the reflection of the window glass, I saw Ilara's face, clear as day, looking over my shoulder. She was no longer overlapping my reflection. She was there, and she smiled. A smile of pure victory. I had brought the witch directly to the one person who might be able to save me. I had just put Professor Finch in danger, and I could barely control my own hands. Ilara's game had become far more dangerous. She didn't just want to use me. She wanted to use my presence to destroy anyone who dared oppose her. I sat down on the professor's couch, my body tingling, and I knew it. The fight for my soul was about to begin, and I was losing. I couldn't breathe properly. The air in the barn, already old and dusty, turned heavy and cold, as if winter itself had suddenly arrived just to wrap me in its icy arms. Ilara was there, not as a formless shadow anymore, but as a real woman, though made of mist and rage. She wore dark clothing, the kind you see in period films, and her eyes, God, her eyes looked like two embers that had been burning for 300 years. And the hatred radiating from her was almost physical. It was the hatred of someone betrayed and unjustly judged. I was frozen. My legs wouldn't move, and my phone, once my weapon and my shield, slipped from my hand and fell into the straw. The sound was muffled, but in that crushing silence it felt like thunder. Ilara moved. She didn't walk. She floated, gliding over the packed dirt floor. She came toward me, and I smelled mold and old earth. You called me! Her voice was a dry whisper, like dead leaves dragged by the wind. You profane my rest for entertainment. I had to speak. I needed her to hear me before terror swallowed me whole. Ilara, I managed to say, her name trembling but steady. I know who you are. I know what they did to you. She stopped less than a meter away. Her pale, severe face twisted in confusion. You know nothing, insolent child. You are like them, coming to laugh at my disgrace. No, I'm not. I shouted, desperation and truth colliding in my voice. I'm Ashley Hawthorne. Your name is my name. I read the journal. I know you weren't a witch. You were a healer. They feared what they didn't understand. The mention of the journal, and, especially, our surname struck Ilara like lightning. The mist around her shuddered. For a second, the rage in her eyes gave way to a deep, ancient pain that seemed to tear through her ghostly soul. Hawthorne, she repeated, her voice now only a moan. The bloodline, and you're the last to remember? I knew this was my only chance. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the locket, the silver locket that had belonged to my grandmother and her mother before her, and that I now knew had once been hers, Ilara's. That small object that had passed through so many hands, guarding a secret for centuries. I held the locket out in my open palm. The faint light from outside reflected off the oxidized metal. This is yours, I said, nudging it toward her. It came to me. It called me, so I could hear your story. When Ilara looked at the locket, her form became more solid for a moment, and I saw misty tears running down her spectral face. They weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of recognition. The locket, she whispered. It holds the key. I looked at it. I had always known it opened, but I'd never paid attention to what was inside beyond the dried, brittle fabric. With a trembling finger, I forced the tiny hinge. The click was almost inaudible. Inside, hidden beneath the velvet lining, There was no photo, no lock of hair. There was a key. A tiny black key, made of a metal that looked like lead, corroded by time but still intact. "The key to the truth," Ilara said, her voice now filled with a melancholy that broke my heart. "They buried me in cold earth, but they hid what proved my innocence. Where the oak bends, beneath the stone with no name. The key. Take it, child of my blood. End this." I suddenly felt the weight of my entire family's history. This wasn't about going viral on TikTok. It was about doing justice for an ancestor who had died alone and slandered. I took the key. It was cold and heavy in my hand. "The oak that bends, where is that?" I asked. Ilara didn't answer with words. She raised her hand, and a pale, almost moonlit beam of light cut across the barn and pointed toward the dark forest, away from the town. It was the place the journal mentioned as the old, unconsecrated burial ground, where victims of hysteria and outcasts were thrown. I didn't think. I just knew I had to go. I grabbed my phone from the ground, barely noticing that it was still recording, and started running. Ilara didn't follow close behind. She floated after me, a silent presence of watchfulness and hope. I ran through the night, my heart pounding in my throat. I was afraid, of course, but the fear of failing her was greater than the fear of the ghost. I passed through the back gate of the property and plunged into the forest. My phone's light was weak, dancing over twisted trees. After about 10 minutes of stumbling and branches whipping my face, I saw the oak. It was enormous, older than the village itself, and it truly bent, nearly touching the ground on one side, as if locked in an eternal bow. I reached it, gasping. The ground there was uneven, full of mossy stones and loose soil. I searched for the stone with no name. It took a while, but I found it, a simple granite slab with no inscription, almost swallowed by tall grass. I knelt. The key in my hand seemed to vibrate. The stone was too large to be just a marker. I ran my hand over it, searching for a crack or mechanism, and I found one. On the side, nearly invisible, there was a tiny keyhole, the exact size of a lead key. My hands shaking, I inserted the key. It turned with a loud creak, a sound that felt like it was breaking centuries of silence. The stone didn't move, but I felt something give beneath it. I pushed hard, and with a terrible scraping sound, the center of the slab shifted, revealing a small dark chamber in the earth. The smell that rose was damp soil and very old paper. I shone my phone's light inside. In the chamber, there was only a small wooden box, sealed with ancient wax. I looked back. Ilara stood at the edge of the phone's light, waiting. She didn't need to speak. The expectation in her misty face said everything. Open it. I took the box. The wood was almost crumbling. I broke the seal and lifted the lid. Inside was a roll of yellowed, fragile parchment. I unrolled it with the utmost care. The handwriting was small, written in faded ink. It was a confession. Not Ilara's, but one of the men who had accused her. The text, written in archaic English, spoke of envy and greed. The man, a local merchant, wanted Ilara's land. When she rejected his advances and refused to sell, he accused her of witchcraft, using the healing of a sick child as proof of dark magic. He wrote the confession on his deathbed, tormented by guilt, and asked a friend to hide it where no one would ever find it, fearing the Puritan community's retaliation. The friend, clearly, fulfilled the part about hiding the evidence, but not the part about revealing it. I began to read aloud, my voice breaking with emotion and exhaustion. I read the story of how Ilara had been honest, how she had been the victim of a cruel lie. He confessed, Ilara, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. You're free. They knew it was a lie. You weren't a witch. You were innocent. As I read the end of the confession, Ilara's ghostly light began to glow intensely. It was no longer cold and frightening, but warm, like candlelight. She stepped forward, and I felt a gentle warmth, not the cold from before. She didn't touch me, but I felt her gratitude. Peace at last, she said. This time, her voice was no longer a dry moan, but a soft sigh of relief. Thank you, my child. You have restored the honor of our bloodline. And then she was gone. Not with a crash, not with a scream, but like morning mist dissolving under the sun. 1 second she was there, the next, there was only the smell of pine and wet earth. The weight I hadn't known I was carrying lifted. The air became normal again. I was alone in the dark forest, holding a 300-year-old parchment and a tiny key. I collapsed into the grass and cried. I cried for Alara, for the fear, for the injustice, and because I had just saved the soul of someone I had never met, but who was my blood. Going home was a blur. I was exhausted, covered in dirt, and emotionally wrecked. Dawn was breaking when I finally arrived. My friends, Liam and Maya, were asleep on the living room couch, worn out from the night of terror and waiting. They woke up when I came in, and the first thing they saw was my condition, and more importantly, the strange calm that now hung over the house. The oppressive feeling was gone. Ashley, where were you? What happened? Liam jumped up, looking me over. I just handed him the parchment and the key. The witch was part of our family, Liam. She was innocent. I freed her. They read the confession. The silence in the room was heavy. They had seen the footage up to the moment I ran into the forest. They knew something supernatural had happened, but holding physical proof of the injustice was something else entirely. This is real, Maya whispered, touching the parchment with reverence. It's her story. And now it's our story, I said. The TikTok challenge, the fame, going viral, all of it felt ridiculous, childish, and empty. I had the biggest historical revelation Salem Falls had ever seen, and the real story of the Hawthorne family. I made a decision immediately. I wasn't going to sell the story to a ghost hunting TV show. I wasn't going to turn Alara's pain into cheap entertainment. But I was going to seek justice. I edited the video. I cut out the most terrifying part of Alara's manifestation, but I kept the audio where I called her name and showed the locket, and I kept the moment when her light faded away. Then I recorded a new video, serious, looking straight into the camera. The midnight challenge is over, I began, my voice hoarse but steady. What I found wasn't a ghost meant to scare you. I found a victim. A woman named Alara Hawthorne, my ancestor. She was falsely accused of witchcraft and killed. For 300 years, her soul was trapped here, waiting for the truth to come out. I show the locket. I show the key. And I show the copy of the confession I had made. I promised I would go viral, and I will. But not with fear. With the truth. Alara wasn't a witch. She was a good woman, betrayed by envy and ignorance. I ask everyone who's taken part in this challenge to stop. Don't play with other people's suffering. Honor the memory of those who were wronged. The video exploded. It didn't go viral as a horror challenge, but as a phenomenon of historical justice and family mystery. The mayor of Salem Falls was not happy. The town lived off witch tourism and the idea that the Hawthorne witch had been innocent threatened the business. But the parchment was undeniable. The confession was authenticated by historians. Alara Hawthorne's story became national news. I was called to testify, not as the girl who summoned a ghost, but as the descendant who uncovered a centuries-old miscarriage of justice. Under pressure from public opinion and the media, the town had to act. The place where Alara had been buried, the unconsecrated burial ground, was finally recognized. The town placed a discreet plaque near the oak tree. It wasn't a monument to a witch. It was a memorial to innocence. And the Hawthorne house, it was at peace. The cold was gone. The heavy air disappeared. It became just an old house, full of history and silence. I changed. Completely. The adrenaline of being famous, of getting millions of views, lost all meaning. I had seen the real side of history, the side that hurts. I had faced death, and it taught me the value of life and truth. I stopped doing TikTok challenges. I didn't delete my account, but I transformed it. I started posting about the real history of Salem Falls, about forgotten people, about how history is written by those who win. Liam and Maya understood. They saw what I saw. They supported me, and together we founded a small historical research group, using the internet to uncover other lost stories. The locket and the key. I kept them, not in a jewelry box, but in a small glass frame in my bedroom, alongside a copy of the parchment. They were my constant reminder. One day, my father came to visit me. He was quiet, emotional. He had never paid much attention to my grandmother's stories about the locket. "You did something important, Ashley," he said, looking at the frame. "You gave her peace. And in a way, you gave peace to our family, which carried that name without ever understanding the weight of it." I smiled. I was no longer the girl obsessed with going viral. I was the guardian of a story. The midnight challenge took me to hell, but in the end, it gave me myself back and connected me to who I really was. I learned that real connection isn't in likes, but in blood, history, and the courage to tell the truth, even when it's been buried for 300 years. And that's how the story of Alara Hawthorne, the healer, finally found its ending, thanks to a girl and a phone on a dark night in Massachusetts. And me. I put the camera away, but I never stopped looking for the truth. History, my friends, truly deserves to be told. And believe me, it's always scarier and more fascinating than anything we invent for the internet.